All right. And welcome to episode 19 of the Mavericast. Can you guys believe it's been 19 episodes already? So our big topic today, we're going to talk about the persecution of Christians within the Middle East. And joining me today, editor-in-chief of the paper, Marlo, Safi.
Hi, everyone.
Publisher, Michael Yorgey.
Hey.
And joining via Skype, Stephen Herreid. Stephen, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Stephen Herreid. I'm a columnist with CatholicVote.org and also Stream.org, and I write fairly frequently about the persecution of minorities in the Middle East.
Excellent. So if you had to say, just because this is a question I always ask people, and I'm curious about the answers I get. If you had to compare yourself to one political figure today, who would you say that you most align with?
I would say probably Miguel Pro. He's my patron saint, and he got shot very young, which is likely to happen to me.
Great.
Probably by my wife rather than a communist government, but it'll happen.
Great. And just so the listener knows, today I want to be sort of curating this discussion and just letting it go where it naturally ends up, because I think this is an area where I literally have experts with me to talk about it. So I want to ask questions, and I think I'm going to be learning just as much as the listeners will. So I just want to open the microphone right away to whoever wants it. Why did you decide, I guess Stephen can answer this, why did you decide to be on our show today, and what is the expertise that you feel you bring to this specific topic, and then we'll go to Marlo after.
Okay, thanks. Well, it's a pleasure to be on the program. I know Marlo from a while back. I used to work with the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. That's how I met Marlo, and I also heard of the fact that she has a Syrian background, and I've been interested in the plight of Christians in the Middle East since long before the rise of ISIS. In college, I attended a Melkite Catholic parish of mostly Lebanese congregants, and when I went to their church, I heard a lot of prayers and a lot of discussions about relatives and acquaintances of recent immigrants who were facing jihadist bigotry and threats and even attacks in the Middle East, and had been for about a decade. This all predates ISIS. And there was a lot of talk about that. One of the things that struck me was that I didn't hear a lot of talk about that in the Roman Catholic parishes that I had attended and had grown up with. I'm a cradle Catholic. And so that really bothered me. And I was impassioned about the fact that something horrible was happening to Christians specifically, but other minorities as well, in the Middle East, and that we weren't talking about it. There just simply wasn't a lot of knowledge. We weren't conversant in what was going on over there. Now, around that time, I was becoming a writer, and I was mostly writing about the pro-life cause. But over the years, I found out as much as I could, and I wrote about this problem as well in the Middle East, and that's been what since I've been writing about it. Probably 50% of the time I write, I'm writing on this topic. After a while, I began to be pretty familiar with it and interview some leaders who do advocacy work on behalf of persecuted minorities in Syria and Iraq and so forth.
Okay, thank you, Marlo. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I entered this by, my heritage, my family, we're entirely Christians, we're Syrian Christians. Most of my family is still in the Middle East. I'd say around 80% of them are. So they're living in an extremely tumultuous time with the Syrian Civil War. And, they live in their small communities of Christians, and these communities aren't hard to discover. They live together, they worship together, and they're very easy to target. So I've just become engrossed in this topic because it's a topic that really, it's something that affects me, it affects my family. It affects, millions of Christians in the Middle East, and it has for centuries. And knowing that they have even less options than some of their, Muslim counterparts by virtue of being such a small minority, such as not being able to escape Syria because either they want to preserve their communities, rightfully so, because there is such a small Christian community in the Middle East, and they can't really go anywhere else because they're literally being, assaulted in refugee camps in Europe. So their options are very slim. They don't have many other places to go. And I've just been an advocate for even, having my peers acknowledge, because I know on college campuses, many students don't understand that this is even an occurrence. They can't possibly wrap their heads around, Christians, one of the most popular religions in the United States, being a religious group that is being persecuted in the Middle East. So my goal is to educate people that this is indeed happening, so that action can follow.
And I'll ask Yorgey a question in a second, but one thing I do want to ask Marlo specifically, and Stephen too. So for those of you who don't know, we actively campaigned, most of us actively campaigned for Trump last fall. And while we were doing so on campus, we often heard a shock at the very notion that there was a Christian genocide and just sort of a disbelief. So in Marlo, in your experience, and Stephen, in your experience, has this been something that you've seen almost universally?
Oh, absolutely. I think the Trump table is a perfect example because, I would be there just as a bystander sometimes, and some of my friends who were at the Trump table would drag me in and be like, Marlo, can you talk to this person? They don't believe me that this is occurring. Mm-hmm. And I would try and compare it to other atrocities that have happened in history, like the Holocaust. And I bring in the Armenian Genocide, which was said to be the inspiration for the Holocaust, where I think it was 1.6 million Christians were slaughtered by the Islamic Turkish regime, and they don't know that these things happened in history. They do not know that there is precedent for what is happening now. So yeah, in my experience, I'm no longer, I'm desensitized to people being surprised by this, but yeah, indeed on college campuses where you think people would be more informed on such egregious acts, they are totally in the dark about it.
Stephen, go right ahead. Same question.
Yeah, there is an alarming amount of ignorance about the violence that's perpetrated by jihadists in the Middle East under ISIS. But what troubles me, I would even say just as much, is the ignorance that pervades public discourse about what the minorities who are targeted are saying. So very little attention is paid. First of all, people don't know there is a genocide going on, right? Which is a problem. But then second, after that, even the people who are aware of the violence that's going on, a lot of them jump the gun. They join advocacy groups and aid groups and screaming about what must be done in Syria and what must be done in Iraq before they even stop to ask what the minorities who are actually suffering the most would advise. So we can get into what they say later. But that's what's also very troubling to me is that, I'm sorry, maybe I'm a little cynical, but it's not just ignorance. Once people are aware of it, they behave in a way that I do not approve of, which is they don't ask the persecuted what they think before they move ahead and go into activism of various kinds, some of which has very bad consequences.
Great, thanks. So because Yorgey hasn't spoken yet today, I know you follow the Syrian conflict very, very closely. What do you think you bring to the discussion today because of that?
Well, I think, to quote what my brother was saying when he got me into it, is just that every day it is like quite literally history unfolding. So there's just so much going on in the country and just in the region in general that it just begs a lot of discussion in a lot of areas. And the one thing that I've just been fascinated in is just like the various groups in the regions and just kind of like everyone's plans, like the history following what led up to it. I just think it's so fascinating.
So, and I'm glad you brought up the history. So I want to ask sort of history question for you guys. Assad, not the best reputation to say the least. What has been the Syrian Christian response to Assad, the civil war itself, and what has their history been like under Assad's rule?
I actually had this conversation with my dad yesterday because yesterday was the 6-year anniversary of the Syrian Civil War. So 6 years ago yesterday that it broke out. For the record, today is March 16th. And
we published your piece about it yesterday, and I'll happily put a link to that below.
Yeah, so I was speaking to my father about it, and basically my dad is the biggest advocate for Assad. Most Christians are. I've never met a Syrian Christian who knows what's going on in the Middle East, who has family in the Middle East, that has advocated for any other force or any other group to assume Assad's power. They are totally behind him because him and his father Hafiz al-Assad have historically been protecting Christians. They are the ones who protect them in their towns. I think how my dad described it to me, and I've looked into this, but Syrian Christians, they are well documented They hold up the Syrian economy. They're hard workers. They are doctors, engineers, lawyers, you name it. The women are involved in, in academia. They're involved in hospitals. My mom's a doctor. My mom's a Syrian doctor. So, they are very much so modernized. They are very much so a secular society, and they want Syria to continue being a secular society. Under any other regime and under any other military power or any other governmental power, Syrian Christians do not have the same rights to exercise what they've been exercising since Hafez al-Assad has been president, and his son Bashar al-Assad. So they want to maintain that secular society, so they're very much so in favor.
Stephen, do you have a perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I actually, on the day of the 2016 presidential election in the U.S., I wrote an article where I compared Trump to Assad and Assad to Trump. And they're not the same person. They're totally different people. Mm-hmm. But what they did have in common is just one thing, which is that the same forces wanted to topple both of them. And what I said was, it's funny to me, Western Christians are willing to turn down a protector because of foul language and philandering. And Middle Eastern Christians, maybe because they're cynical, maybe because they're more long-suffering, maybe because they're more shrewd, but they're willing to tolerate an absolute despot if it means avoiding genocide against them, bigotry against them, jihad, etc. I don't know. I mean, it's funny. I think one of the more delicate ways I've heard it put by an American commentator recently was that he just said a lot of Christians on the ground in the Middle East they don't even believe some of the things that are verifiably true that are negative about Assad. They're maybe conspiracy theorists. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if anyone should be indulged a little bit to have a conspiracy theory about their own nation and its government and its people, it's the people who are the most vulnerable, who are the most under attack. And for the past decade, people have been under attack by jihadists in Syria, and they have learned by experience that their best shot at safety and at protection is to support rather than to dismantle whatever regime happens to be in place there. So it's funny to me. I mean, basically what I'm getting at is that you don't have to be a full-throated defender of Assad to say, yeah, I don't want you to knock him over right now. We're under attack by ISIS, for heaven's sake. Just like you don't have to be a full-throated, just absolute adorer of Trump to say, well, of course I voted for him. The alternative frightens me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think there's an analogy to be drawn there. A little bit clumsy, but it holds, I think.
And could you send me a link to that, because I can put it below for the podcast.
Sure thing. Yeah, it was a column at the Stream against anti-Christian bigotry. Trump is far better than Clinton. I think it's something like that. It was on the day of the election.
Okay. And you mentioned that about a decade ago was when this started. So could you give me a sort of a glimpse of what life was like for a Christian in Syria before all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So my piece yesterday that I published about life before the civil war in Syria. The last time I was in Syria was when I was 13, and I had I was not cognizant of the fact that I may never go back. I didn't know that this war would break out. Obviously, I was a 13-year-old girl, and life in Syria was splendid. I'm going to say that much. I would say, I love this country, and I think it's, the United States has some of the most beautiful locations that you could ever imagine to visit. But Syria was just something else. I describe it as being my paradise, because it was a different kind of paradise. It wasn't riddled with, corporations, wasn't riddled with, just this, I mentioned this in my column, there weren't any McDonald's, there weren't any Walmarts. And I thought there was some, solace in that places like this still existed. So it was incredibly beautiful. The people all knew each other. People were incredibly friendly. Christians, I could go to church whenever I wanted to without fear of, ISIS invading and trying to turn it into a mosque and killing every Christian in the village. These weren't things that Syrians worried about. These weren't things that Christians worried about.
That's my favorite thing about my home parish too, is that I can go there without getting attacked by ISIS. I love that in Paris. It's a great quality of church.
Yeah, it really is. said that that's now a concern, that if you wear a cross around your neck, you're now a target. So Christians have become really reserved. Their communities have kind of shrunk in literal numbers, but within themselves, they've kind of collapsed because out of fear, naturally, this is what's going to happen. So it's really heartbreaking to know that, my own family in this, beautiful village where even my mom went to college in Aleppo, knowing that's completely, destitute now. It's rubble. Knowing that where I once visited in my mom's hometown in her village, that is now, ISIS completely has went in and evacuated it of all its residents, and these were all mostly Christians as well. So not to say that Muslims aren't also suffering; they of course are. They're the majority population of Syria, but Christians especially, they used to be able to walk the streets with their crosses around their neck on their way to church without fear of any sort of transgression. And knowing that this place that I used to attend church and where I was baptized even is now a place where I can't, take my own children, that's a very stark contrast from, just a 6-year period. So that's really astounding.
Absolutely. And I can remember, I did Mod UN in high school. And whenever I was in sort of the Security Council, the topic was almost always Syria. And I think to myself, wow, that was a very long time ago that I was doing that. So, I mean, that puts 6 years into perspective for me, that it has been raging for this long. And so during these 6 years, I mean, we know about the way Christians have been treated by ISIL and or ISIS, whatever term you prefer. How do you think they view the rebel groups? And I realize that rebel groups could mean anything from Al-Qaeda to moderate rebels, and there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah.
There's no such thing as a moderate rebel. They're all terrorists.
Except for the Kurds. Well, apparently Kurds are terrorists.
Yeah. Except for the Kurds. You asked my dad about this. I asked him about this yesterday. He's like, there's no such thing as a moderate rebel. The rebels are just like Al-Qaeda. They're all the same. Mm-hmm. They're all committing the same. I'm sure Michael can kind of elaborate on this because he's been following the more, military and governmental aspect. I've been following more, cultural and religious aspect. But there's no such thing. These, they're all alike in terms of the havoc that they're causing. Mm-hmm. If Michael, you wanted to go into that a little bit further.
Oh, I mean, that's like when you look at the map, even right now, because like some of the skirmishes with like Assad and some of the rebels haven't like really changed a bit, except for some like mm-hmm. gains. But you can see where like the Christians have been and where like the major fronts have been, and who's been involved. Like Christians have been residing mostly in like Latakia, Aleppo, and then I think in Homs, and those are primarily where they had to deal with ISIS. And they had to deal with, at the time, al-Nusra, which is still... They're in a coalition with a bunch of rebel groups, and they're, like, back and forth. But, when you're at the front like that, I mean, I can't imagine what it's going to be like. To be kind of, like, direct, to be, like, the first on the chopping blocks got to be a weird feeling.
Yeah, the parish that I mentioned I attended in college, these were Lebanese folks. But already there, it was beginning to dawn on me that Barack Obama was universally feared and hated by most minorities in the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
Especially in Syria. Because there were rebel groups before the rise of ISIS who were beheading, persecuting, raping, killing, with weaponry provided by the U.S. government and by the Obama White House. Now, of course, a lot of Middle Easterners feel roughly the same way about George W. Bush, but it's funny. I think a lot of liberal protesters from the Bush era would be shocked to learn and hesitant to admit that in the Middle East, at least, Obama is viewed as doubly as frightening as Bush. So it's a very, very different picture over there. That again, it's amazing how little a lot of people know about it in this country.
And that's my next question. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the people who will flood the streets for any, in the United States, for any social issue, why is it that these people don't understand what's going on and they don't understand the genocide happening? Is it ignorance? Is it refusing to acknowledge it? I don't know. So I'm curious what you guys think.
It's a lot to do with the reporting, and that it's been, for the most part, of course we can call out Assad for whatever he does wrong, and the Russians too. But it's so easily one-sided to call him out as the monster when there's so many things going on. Like, so many people, like, even all of us are like very ignorant, not because of our own being, but just because of the information being shared of how many drone strikes our country carries out and how many collateral damage we get.
And that's a good point too, because whenever I want to get news even on Syria, I find myself turning to alternative outlets and not going to sort of mainstream American outlets to get it. Yeah. Like, I know there's one website that I actively visit that tracks the day-to-day changes of the war, and that's just one aspect of it. And I haven't been able, like, I can't turn on CNN or Fox and see coverage of it. It just doesn't happen.
The only ones that were, like, okay-ish, and I mean that lightly, was Al Jazeera, because they were the ones that just kept a tab. So
Yeah,
it wasn't
and
right.
Al Jazeera is well noted for they do have a bias, even though it's very fine reporting in the Middle East. There is still a bias that needs to be acknowledged. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we're tackling this issue, there is one thing of we always have to worry about the media spinning a narrative. Of course, this election has definitely brought that to light more than past ones have. And when it comes to the Syrian Christian genocide, when it comes to minority genocide, at this time, we have to consider that. Like, personally, I do not look. I read all news about Syria, trying to grasp what I can about what's happening. I usually have to turn to my parents about it because, of course, they have they're speaking to people who are experiencing it themselves, and they look at Syrian news outlets and Middle Eastern news outlets. If you're going to look for news about the Christian genocide, the only people, so in the election season, while it was still occurring and we had like 17 people running as Republicans, the only people to speak about it and bring it to light were Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, Jeb Bush, and I think that's about, Ted Cruz, I said Ted Cruz already. I think it was those two were the most prominent. Ted Cruz, they all received backlash from liberals. I had professors that even said that, this was disgusting, that how dare they bring up that Christians are, being, they're the ones being killed and brutalized when, everyone in the Middle East is being killed and brutalized. So people literally do not know this is happening because what the media is telling, the most prominent media outlets, they are not reporting on the matter. The only news outlets that have been reporting on it, now, take this as you will, Breitbart has actually been providing excellent coverage of this issue. National Review has been providing very reliable coverage of this issue. It has been conservative news outlets. Whether you think that they're spinning a narrative or not, they're the only people that have been providing us with statistics, and they're the only people that have been covering us with, have been allowing people to read about this issue. And I think Stephen can probably go into this, considering he is part of the media.
And then I'll hop in just for a quick second. I think, and I'll attest and I'll confirm that Breitbart has actually been doing excellent coverage on this. And I've spoken about Breitbart a number of times in this podcast, and what I saw is the demise of Breitbart. But whenever I see coverage on Breitbart, I saw around Christmas time about Christians in Iraq celebrating Christmas for the first time in years. And I couldn't get that news anywhere else. And that's what I said about alternative outlets. But Stephen, go ahead.
No, that's right. There's a real war going on, specifically among Christians, and I mean Western Christians. And I'm on one side of that war, and I intend to win. The mainstream narratives that you hear about, for instance, what's going on in Syria? Well, if I just gleaned from the mainstream takes on Syria, all I would know was that there was a monster there who literally has 3 heads, and his name is Assad, and he eats children, and that's the only thing you need to know. So what we need to do is we need to go over there and we need to bomb him to death, and then we need to go to a world war with Russia for ever having, made eyes at him. And it's an atrociously wrong narrative. It's out of the blue. It's just crazy. And why do I think it's crazy? Well, I think it's crazy because it's cruel, because it's insensitive, because it does not match up at all with the views of the people who have the most at stake. And that doesn't just mean Christians in the Middle East. One of the things that bothers me a lot is this talk about being sectarian. I'll tell you, actually, Robert Christian, he's a Catholic public figure and he's part of an organization called Democrats for Life. It's an ostensibly pro-life group that mostly works to get Democrats elected and then say, oops, once those Democrats turn out not to be pro-life. I'm not impressed with the organization. But he was sharing photographs of the horrors in Syria. Totally one-sided. It was all about how the U.S. has to take aggressive action against the Syrian Assad regime, right? And I confronted him, and all I said was, I think this is cynical. Why don't you ask the people with the most at stake, particularly Christian prelates in the Middle East, what they think? I linked to a great interview on Crux with a bishop from Syria, and he unhesitatingly, immediately responded, thousands of Muslims have died too, comma, you sectarian piece of trash. And he said this in public. He said it. There was no hesitancy about it at all. And that is something that we have to absolutely, I think, resist and stand up to. It's not just about us and our hurt feelings, and my pride was hurt, sure. But it's about you're trashing people for sticking up for people who are victimized by ISIS and have been victimized by U.S.-backed jihadists for a long time, right? You're not the underdog here. You're not sticking up for anyone. You're part of a ruling class that wants perpetual war and all of these horrible things. So anyway, that's just a little anecdote. But it really, I think we should be angry about it. We should be pushing back on that. And unfortunately, some of the people that we're going to have to be pushing back on include people that we don't want to necessarily push back on. In my case, Roman Catholic bishops. I recently wrote a column where basically I said most of what you hear from American Roman Catholic bishops about the crisis in the Middle East it doesn't in any way resemble the pleadings of the Middle Eastern bishops. They don't match at all, right? So I mean, there's a lot to push back on. I think it's really important for us to try to change that narrative.
And I do have some more questions that I want to get into. But one thing I want to ask Marlo specifically, because through supporting Trump, we met other Syrian Christians who shared the view of supporting Donald Trump and his willingness to speak on the subject. So did you notice a support for Donald Trump among the Syrian Christian community?
Absolutely. I think Syrian Christians were the most adamant supporters of Donald Trump. I remember on Election Day when we found out Trump won, my mom mentioned to me, she's like, Marlo, my Facebook, my timeline blew up. Syrian Christians were absolutely rejoicing that Donald Trump won the election. And this is really astounding when you consider the narrative that the media had spun about, Arabs in general being, the victimized and marginalized group in the U.S. that is going to be the main victim group should he become president. They totally forgot that there are a significant portion of those Arabs, the Arab Christians, that, full-heartedly support Donald Trump and his vision for the Middle East. And to this day, I go on Twitter, I go on Facebook, and that support has not waned. They continue to be hopeful that, he will, inspire change in the Middle East. He'll somehow, he'll do what he has to do to ensure that this war will not continue. And he won't just be, on the sidelines. But yeah, I mean, it's really amazing. I actually met some people at Pitt that I approached them that while they're at the table. I'm like, hey, you go to my church, and I go to an Arabic Orthodox church, and they're like, yeah, and they told me, can I join this table? Like, do you guys meet somewhere? And, and I was astounded by that because this is something I had not realized. So yeah, huge support for Donald Trump. And
you've told me before, your parents are not Republicans, is that correct?
No, my mom is very apolitical, and my dad is progressive. He was a huge fan of Barack Obama. My mom doesn't really care for politics, but I'd say she's conservative. Both my parents are socially conservative, but they're economically liberal. But yeah, they were open-minded to Trump. Yeah.
Is this the first time that they voted for a Republican for president?
Yeah. So my parents, my parents both are registered Democrats, and my dad, I remember him saying, you know what, Marlo, like, this is really a unique election. My dad's been in the U.S. since the early 80s, I believe, and he thought that after Bush he'd never vote for another Republican. So that is a very common trend among Syrian Christians.
And Stephen, have you noticed anything else to that effect?
Yes, definitely. One great columnist to follow, by the way, on Middle Eastern issues is an Iraqi-born columnist by the name of Luma Sims. She's a senior fellow at the Philos Project, and she reported before and after the election that her many acquaintances who are themselves immigrants or even refugees were big supporters of Donald Trump. After the election, she said a common refrain among them was, "God had mercy on us," right? That he was elected rather than Hillary Clinton. My colleague Jason Jones, he's another columnist at The Stream, he traveled to Iraq and Syria and visited several refugee camps where he spoke with a number of persecuted minorities of various sects and ethnicities, including Yazidis and Christians and also some Muslims. And he questioned them, and he said, yes, it was very common for them to feel that. One thing is that they felt very confident that Barack Obama was frightening and bad, and that he had hurt them and abandoned them, and they wanted change. They saw Hillary Clinton, they saw as a continuation of what Barack Obama represented. After all, she was a part of his White House. And she also promised to ramp up war efforts, so they saw her as very frightening. And yeah, a lot of the refugees in camps in the Middle East were Trump supporters. Were really hoping for him to win.
And that's it's so fascinating for me to hear this, because I love foreign policy. I take foreign policy classes here at school, and one of the things I always hear is that Barack Obama was more in the world than George W. Bush was. That Bush had his goals in the world, and he went in them and he surgically did them. But Barack Obama was somebody who wanted to help everybody in the world, and it's amazing for me to hear a different perspective like this that I've never heard before on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at this point, I think a lot of Arabs just want to be left alone. To be honest, they don't want this fancy diplomacy anymore. They want kind of they don't want anything that will influence more conflict. And sometimes when you meddle into, especially in the Middle East, when you meddle, as we've seen in, the past, it's just going to cause more and more conflict. And I mean, Arabs, especially Syrian Christians, are very, very tired of that. So, Obama especially, he is not looked at fondly. Anyone who tells me otherwise is just has not been educated correctly.
And so another question along these lines, what are their goals for the Trump administration? What do they want to see the Trump administration accomplish, whether that be in the region or whether that be in the United States?
Yeah. What a lot has been done, actually. One thing that before the election, the Philos Project president, Robert Nicholson, wrote up a proposal for a protected men of a plane. This is just in Iraq. And he wrote up this proposal, which would involve protecting minorities in Iraq, getting people, the international community to be involved in supporting them, establishing their own safe zone, their own region in the Nineveh Plains, and their own militias, and having funding from their own government and so forth to protect themselves. So this just gives you a little hint. He presented these things, this proposal that he had written, to both the Trump camp and the Hillary camp. The Trump camp incorporated it into the GOP platform, and the Democrats rejected it. So that's just a little background. To this day, that's what is still being advocated by a lot of folks is protected units, protected regions for Christians to have sovereignty in Iraq, in the Nineveh Plains. But the other thing is what clergy and Christian leaders in the Middle East have been calling for since ISIS attacked in 2014. What they've consistently called for is decisive military action against ISIS itself. No distractions, just get rid of them, destroy them. And they have said that from the start. They still do say that. And Marlo, it's interesting you were talking about the take that a lot of Syrian and other Middle Eastern Christians have on Trump and how they were kind of pro-Trump. I think part of it was that he definitely, I think he was the peace presidential candidate. I think he represented peace much more than his opponent did. But another element there is that when he did talk about the Middle East, the one thing he was aggressive on was just laser focused. I'm going to bomb ISIS off the face of the earth. I'm going to destroy ISIS. He didn't say, I'm going to, topple the Assad regime and maybe oversee a democratic election and then maybe see what we can do. Maybe we can do something similar, redo in Egypt. And, he didn't talk about any of that fancy stuff. He just said, I'm going to destroy ISIS. And I'll even work with Russia and Assad if necessary, if that'll help. So I think that's a big element.
Something I wanted to add. So the Russia aspect, my parents, my family, they aren't necessarily pro-Russia, but the Russians have indeed played a helpful role in, propping up Assad, and that is what Syrians want to see. That's what Syrian Christians want to see, this might be by whatever means necessary. So to see Trump saying that, he is willing, God forbid, somehow not have hostile relations with the next largest superpower in the world, they were, that elicited a lot of hope in them because they don't want to see someone who is, could possibly cut off their one chance at having Assad, the person who has, the regime that has historically protected them, possibly be, completely dismantled. That just throws out any possibility of, future peace in Syria, especially.
Yeah, really. It's just interesting too. I mean, as much as I would like to see something like done in Syria, I think that, or not meaning like overthrow Assad. It is interesting with what Trump wants to do with like just defeating terror or just defeating with ISIS. Though I would like to see what our government or what even the Pentagon has in store, because I've seen some changes. I mean, the fact that we're deploying more troops in Syria, I mean, it's for ISIS, but it makes me wonder what the long run strategy is. But I mean, it's been a good thing. I don't know precisely about autonomy and how Trump's gonna focus on that at all, but I know part of the ban on quote that he wants to impose. What it's supposed to do is part of the revision of the vetting process is to make sure that prosecuted minorities are recognized and they're able to be vetted through properly, which no one seems to care about.
And I know that's something that we talked about a little bit, is that's what people don't want to acknowledge with Trump's proposed travel ban. And do you guys have an idea of how do Syrian Christians in the U.S., or I mean especially those in the Middle East, because the original travel ban made religious distinctions, and so I'm imagining their support for the original travel ban was much greater than the sort of watered down one that we have now.
Oh, they are totally in favor of religious tests, just because Syrian Christians, their values, they very much so are compatible with the values of most Americans. Law and order, first off, but also traditional Christian values, Judeo-Christian values, and they are completely compatible with each other, with our Constitution and our way of life in the United States. They come here, they're able to assimilate very, very easily. All it takes is learning the language. That's really all it takes. And once you have that down, there aren't many discrepancies between the way Americans conduct themselves and the way Syrian Christians conduct themselves. And these people, Syrian Christians, they've experienced what life is like in the Middle East and, majority Muslim nations. They understand that they are very much so marginalized, and this way of life is not conducive to the potential that these communities have in the United States. So they don't want to bring potential terrorism, potential, Sharia to the United States. So these religious tests are, they're very much so advocates of them. They want to make sure that they come to this country for a reason. They don't want to bring with them or have, come follow them the values and kind of this more threatening way of life that they had, that there is right now to the country that they seek refuge in.
Yeah, I think there's an important element to add, a nuance to add to that, which is, I think that Syrian Christians and Iraqi Christians rightly suspect interpretations of Muslim scripture as being dangerous. Right? There are certain passages in the Quran that are threatening, that call for violence against others and so forth, and that if that's taught, at least if that's taught in certain ways, we know that radicalizes, so to speak, young people even in the West. These are, in mosques in the West and Europe and so forth. This has been talked about by some clerics over there. But at the same time, when they talk about how there's something inherently dangerous in Muslim scripture, which is very politically incorrect, you know who agrees with them? A lot of Muslims. Think about it. What kind of a Muslim would get angry at you for pointing out that there are certain texts in the Quran that could inspire violence if they're taught in a certain way? The only Muslim that's going to take issue with that is a jerk. Right? There are plenty of Muslims in the Middle East who would say, yes, the Quran does have a tendency to be used to promote violence. We should subdue that. Right? They're not for that. So that's just a little nuance to add there. But yeah, as for the travel ban, and in the initial travel ban, there was definitely a preferential treatment for persecuted minorities. Bishop Bashar Warda of Erbil, Iraq, who cares for the highest number of Christians displaced by ISIS in the country, he was profoundly hurt that Westerners were protesting the idea of giving preferential treatment to victims of genocide. I mean, he just said, he was almost at a loss for words. He was so disgusted. And I stand with him. I think that's just absolutely, it's just unforgettable and gross that people would take to the streets to say, to act as though there's something generous about not discriminating between targeted and non-targeted people during the course of the genocide. It's absolutely despicable. So that's just something, just for what it's worth.
And to branch off that, we've established what daily life was like for Syrian Christians under Assad before the Civil War. We talked about what it's like for the last 6 years. What would you say it's like right now?
It's just full of uncertainty. Uncertainty if, you'll be able to have anything more than bread and salt to eat the next day, if your kids will be able to go to school, if your daughter, if your wife will be, able to walk outside showing her ankles, or if she'll have to wear a hijab, or she'll risk being slaughtered. If you're, especially, this really ties in women's issues, and this is why this frightens me so much, is that the women who are suffering most through this are the Christian women who might have to sacrifice their religion and their faith to appeal to or to appease these religious extremists and to save their lives. How do you go to church when the church is being persecuted? So it's a constant afterthought, or even before thought of can I go to church on Sunday? Will the church still be there on Sunday? And what's our backup plan? Are we going to be able to leave Syria? We can't go to Germany because we're being brutalized in these camps as well. There's no clemency on applying to come to the States because there's no religious test, and they're not giving priority to Arab Christians. So really, they're between a rock and a hard place. It's really just horrible conditions. It's such a stark contrast between how it was 6 years ago. Even though things weren't ever perfect in Syria, Syria does have a very, compared to the rest of the Middle East, it doesn't have a great history. Really, none of them do, but it's very, very different, and it's, whenever you lament on it, whenever you consider what the change is, it's very frightening to consider what life will be like in a few years. If now already there's a chilling effect of hiding your faith, hiding your crosses, hiding your face with a hijab if you're a woman. Just basically altering physical appearances to save your life at this point.
Yeah, another element there is also Christians in Syria actually took part in protests against the Assad regime before the Civil War. Right, so in other words, they're not. It was democratic enough that you could, for one thing. You can do protests is one thing. A bloody civil war is another. So, in other words, they did have. They're not monolithic. You can't shame them by saying, "Oh, you're just total supporters of the Assad regime, well, one of them could say, no, we actually protested in some instances because of some injustices before, but this is an entirely different picture now.
And unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I do have a couple more quick, maybe perhaps quicker questions that I want to get at. This next one, because Stephen mentioned Christians that you knew in Lebanon. So, what has it been like in recent times for the Christians who maybe they've lived in Iraq, maybe they've lived in Lebanon, or even in Israel? What has it been like during the Civil War for them if they're not specifically in Syria? How have they been impacted by?
I can speak briefly on Israel. I think Stephen might have more knowledge about Lebanon. I do know, like, Iraq especially. Iraq has, if not as, might be as bad or worse for Christians in Iraq. And for Lebanon, most of Lebanon is, I think it's 50% of the population is Christian. So it has the highest Christian population in the Middle East. So naturally, things aren't going to be, as hostile toward them. In fact, I think the new president of Lebanon is indeed a Christian. So they're very much so. Maronite Christians are the most populous Christian population in Iraq, or in Lebanon rather. But in Israel, I remember, like, Israel is. I mean, naturally they are very open to religious integration. From what I've seen, even a few months ago, Netanyahu's welcomed people from Aleppo into Israeli hospitals, and it is the only place in the Middle East that currently that is welcoming to Christians and can basically promise Arab Christians safe living quarters. So as far as Israel goes, I think it's great that there is, even if it's a small sliver of land, that there is a location where even Syrian Christians are welcomed and can be taken care of, regardless of, whether it's a country that Syrians have historically not been fond of.
Yeah, I think I slipped, or Iraq. I think northern Iraq, that was been held by ISIS for a while. I mean, it still is, but there's been a huge counterattack. But like, I know, like the Nineveh region, like that was completely controlled by ISIS until recently. So I mean, when you have your whole like environment controlled by the enemy, I mean, that's got to be something else.
Yeah.
But I know, I mean, yeah, Lebanon's interesting. I don't know. I mean, the Levant region's just really interesting with it. They're both like with Assad and against Assad at the same time. Or they're more for him, but yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, it's just Iraq too is that we really got to worry about, because I mean, there's still so many people like just getting mowed down by ISIS, and it's just because they want to do it. I mean, they know that the U.S. and Iraq's going to take over, and they're just doing suicide bombings just to do it at this point. It's getting crazy.
Yeah, American soldiers recently have a lot of them have given their lives in Iraq for, and others as well, of course, Iraqi soldiers and Christian militiamen to take that land back from ISIS.
Oh, can you talk about the Christian militiamen? I'm just really curious about that. Like, where do they reside usually? Is that like near Nineveh? Like, were they in Mosul?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what they're currently, working to completely oust ISIS. And in Mosul and other towns in Nineveh, what they're doing is they're getting rid of ISIS, but then what ISIS leaves behind are ruins, booby traps, homes, and so forth. And so from an Iraqi perspective, this is an important thing to bring up. Christian leaders, the protectors of the flocks who have been most persecuted by ISIS, what they've consistently called for since the very beginning, since 2014, is destroy ISIS and send us the means to help care for the displaced until they can return home to their homes in Iraq and Syria. So the ultimate goal here, from their perspective, is not mass migration to the West. Now, it's profoundly insulting that we exclude and actually, basically that the UN is beating up on the minorities that do want to flee to the West, right? But it's very important to note that ultimately the whole narrative about mass migration as a solution to the crises in the Middle East, that whole narrative is just out of nowhere. It's about, and almost all of the migrants who are coming to the West are Muslim, it has resulted in absolute bloodbaths and chaos in Europe, and it's resulted in not a few attacks even in the U.S. for Middle Eastern mass migration to be in effect. Whereas what's being called for by the leaders of persecuted minorities in the Middle East is ultimately our goal is we want to return home. And that's a really important message that I think it's imperative that we get that out. Because of all that can be said of the Middle East, I think that's the least publicized and known thing.
So we are running right against the wall here, but I have just one more question, and that is, how can, whether they be Pitt students, whether they be fans of the show, someone who casually strolled across this podcast, how can they get involved and become an advocate against or for the people who faced this sort of persecution and against those who do it to them?
I think Stephen's best equipped to answer this question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, one organization is Iraqi Christian Relief Council. It's run by an acquaintance of mine named Juliana Tamrazi, and she is an Iraqi Syrian Christian, and she does a lot of advocacy work on the ground. She can, for one thing, if you're wealthy, send your money to these bishops in the Middle East who are taking care of the refugees. A lot can be done through private charity that is being completely neglected by governments. And you can do things like adopt a town, right? So you send a little money to help them rebuild their homes after ISIS is ousted, or send them a little money to help them keep their refugees wherever they are, in the camps and in the churches and in the communities that are housing them temporarily. So that's the Iraqi Christian Relief Council. Another is a Samaritan Purse, which is doing a lot of really good work. One of the things that they're doing is also they're working to provide medics to actual battlefields where American soldiers and Iraqi soldiers are often being wounded in battlefields, like for instance in Mosul. A lot of them would be wounded, and their wounds would be things that normally, if they got immediately treated, they would recover. But because there's just not enough medical assistance on the ground, they'll just bleed out over the course of an hour and die because there's not enough medical. So Samaritan's Purse is working to get medical stations set up. It's really dangerous, heroic work, and I just really would love to see that people support that as well. So those are two. I'm a Knight of Columbus. I'm a third-degree Knight. The Knights of Columbus, if you Google what they're doing there, they're also pretty great. My fellow John Jay alumnus, Nate Madden of the Conservative Review, recently wrote up a really great article about establishing a protected Nineveh plain, and he interviewed some Knights of Columbus about what they're doing on the ground. So I would support that as well.
And then, just so for college students on campus, Marlo, I know you distributed stickers not that long ago about it. So can you give an explanation of what they are and how students can get them?
Yeah, so the symbol for Nazarene, which is in Arabic, the term for Christian is Nasrani, from the term Nazarene. And the symbol is the letter Nun in Arabic. I've dispersed stickers to many Pitt students about it, just to put on your laptop, just to kind of spur discussion about it. When someone sees this sticker and asks you, what is that? It looks like an upside down smiling face without the second eye. And you can explain to them, this is what it is. It's in solidarity with Christians who are being persecuted in the Middle East. And, often people are like, I didn't know that existed. I have never seen this symbol before. I didn't even know that this was an issue. So I think on college campuses, it's the biggest concern is, do these students even understand what's happening? So in whichever way you can, trying to start discussion about it, trying to make it common knowledge among the most educated of us. I mean, you'd assume you're paying, at Pitt at least, you're paying, $27,000 a year to go here. You should probably know that this is an issue if you're following foreign policy or even politics to any degree, or even cultural issues. So I think, if you're from a different college and you're listening to this right now, or even if you're a Pitt student and you're listening to this, go online, look this up, look up what Noon means, look up Nasrani, try and get one of these stickers just so, you can disseminate information whenever people come and ask you. Something as simple as having a sticker on your laptop can spur discussion. So I think that the biggest thing at Pitt especially is making sure that everyone knows. This includes not only students but faculty, because I have actually come across faculty, like professors who had no idea this was even an issue. So yeah, I definitely think starting discussion about the issue.
All right, and I want to say thank you to everyone for coming on today. Stephen, thank you for Skyping in.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
And before we close out, I want to say go ahead, if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with friends, family, Facebook, anybody. It goes a long way to helping us make this more successful. You can find us on all forms of social media. If you go ahead and give us a follow, give us a like, it goes a long way to helping make the project more successful. If you're willing, please go ahead and support us on Patreon. That also helps us immensely as well. And so one question I always ask every single week before we wrap up is, what did you learn in the Mavericast today? So who wants to start?
There are badass Christian militias out there.
Mine is that I wasn't totally aware of what life was like under Assad, because you can go online and you can read about what he's done and how he was as a leader, but you very rarely get a glimpse into what daily life was like for somebody who lived in a country like this. And I thought that was very interesting to learn more about.
Yeah, I think I knew about a few of these charities, but I've been trying to follow Knights of Columbus much more closely, because I know that they were trying to petition Congress, I think, for somehow acknowledging the genocide. So I think I'm very interested in delving more into these what's it called, charities.
Stephen, go ahead.
Well, what I learned is just that you guys have a terrific podcast. I'm going to start following it and listen to it.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. Thank you. And thank you to the listener for tuning in, and we'll see you next week right here at the Mavericast.